to the first video on this channel. As you can see from the title, we're going to be talking about North Africa and the relationship or the connection that it has with Islam. Islam was introduced in the region by the Arabs during the 7th century, and from that point until now, the identity of the region has been changed, and Islam, of course, has left a lasting impact. And so the first part of this video is going to be genetic. We're going to be looking at the genome of Northwestern Africans. And the second part, you're going to be looking at a cultural culture or a cultural structure of the Maronids between the 13th and the 15th century. So let's start by sharing the screen. Go here. Here we go. So this is a study here made by the Municipal Institute of Barcelona in Spain. So the resources of this study, as you can see, 152 individuals, not 18 from Western Sahara, 18 from North Morocco, 16 from South Morocco, 19 from Algeria, 18 from Tunisia, 17 from Libya, and 19 from Egypt. And also we have 20 individuals from the Spanish Basque Country. Also, we have 20 Qatari from the Arabian Peninsula, and we have 20 Western Africans. So let's start by the structure of the landscape, genetic landscape. So according to the study, analysis based on the frequencies of a small number of autosomal genetic polymorphisms and uniparental markers have shown that genetic landscape follow an east-west pattern with little to no difference between Berber and Arab-speaking populations. So this is very important here. No difference between Berber and Arab-speaking populations. So what does it mean? So as east-west pattern that shows no difference between Berber and Arab-speaking populations. So as you can see here, this is from the west to the east and the east to the west. So from Egypt to specifically from, for example, populations in the Siwa Oasis, you would expect, of course, more eastern components from to the Siwa from here. But at the same time, the populations, for example, between Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia and Libya, they have no differences because, of course, the Amazigh or the Maghrebi indigenous components is mainly known to be from the oasis of Siwa, from the Siwa Oasis to the Canary Islands. And so Arab-speaking populations, culturally Arabized, who are Berbers but speak the Arabic dialects of Darija, who cannot speak Berber, are the same, have the same components, genetic components, of the, for example, Berbers in the Atlas, or the Algerians in Algiers or Wahran have the same composition like the Berbers in Kabyle. Little to no difference, of course. The same goes with Tunisians and etc., etc. Now, an east-to-west transect across the continents. We clarify the population structure of North Africa and explicitly interrogate the history of the gene flow from the Near East to Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa. So we're going to start by the Near East. So as you can see, Qatari is on the right as Qatar. They're parallel, as you can see here. So when you go from the right to the left, which translates geographically from the east to the west, the green markers here represents the eastern markers. So when you go from here to here, you're going to notice a decline in the eastern markers. So the minimum eastern markers you're going to find are in this region, and the most markers you're going to find are in here, which is completely logical because the closer you get to the geographical native land of the Arabs, the more eastern, or the Middle East in general, the more eastern / Arab components you're going to find. And the more you get closer to the native land of the Amazigh, the more native indigenous Maghrebi components you're going to find. So if you went to Saudi Arabia, you're not going to call people Amazigh just because they have a kind of a, as you can see, they have a kind of a small Berber component here, just a little, like a minuscule. Doesn't mean they're going to call them Amazigh. The same goes here. People here they have a Middle Eastern component. Doesn't mean you're going to call them Arabs or Middle Easterns. But it's more complicated than that. Of course, as you can see, the markers in the west of the east are more than the markers of the west in the east, as you can see. And that has two reasons. So the first reason is the divergence of the Northern African populations from the OOA groups. The OOA groups are the groups outside of Africa populations. More than 12,000 years ago, the indigenous Maghrebi components is estimated to have diverged from the Near Eastern / Europeans between 18 to 38,000 years ago. So the ancestral Maghrebi population separated from the Near Eastern populations prior to the Holocene. The Holocene is approximately 12,000 years ago, and that the Maghrebi populations do not represent a large-scale demic diffusion of agropastoralists from the Near East. This here is the main highlight of the gene flow coming from the Near East, aka the green marker. So this is the green marker here, as you can see. This is the green marker. As we can see, it increases. So this green marker here does not only signify literally people coming here and mingling with Amazighs. No. But it mainly signifies, according to this study here, it's a remaining of the populations that diverged, right, from the Amazigh 18 to 38,000 years ago. So that's the green marker here is mainly a marker of the populations that diverged and went to settle in here and settle in Ireland, settle in other places in the planet. So, for example, the Irish, according to DNA genome sequencing, they have found that they are descendants of people that have traveled all the way from the Middle East to Ireland. Doesn't mean they are Middle Easterners. The same thing goes here. These populations here are also descendants of people that were separated. They diverged from the populations that went here, and instead they went to settle here. And that's how genetic isolation works. They were isolated for a long period of time. They developed their own haplogroups, which is the EM81 and the EM183, which is the native indigenous Maghrebi components. So again, let's go back here. The indigenous Maghrebi components is estimated to have diverged from Near Eastern / European between 18 to 38,000 years ago. So that's the first reason why we notice the Eastern markers. So the second part of the first reason why we have Eastern markers is the demic diffusion. So the demic diffusion, I'm not talking about physical field or the chemical field, but the meaning of demic diffusion in the genetic field is basically a low concentration of populations getting absorbed by a higher / superior concentration of another population. So that means the Maghrebi populations absorbed a agro-pastoralist population from the Near East. So this study here invalidates that and debunks that. So the Maghrebi populations do not represent a large-scale demic diffusion. So a large scale of the scenario of large-scale agro-pastoralists from the Near East moving to North Africa, getting absorbed by North Africans is highly unlikely, or straightforward, it's false. Now, the second part of the Eastern component is the Arab conquest, which is the biggest argument, or the biggest kind of the status quo of a lot of people in speaking about the narrative. Their status quo of their narratives are the Arab conquest. What are you? I am Arab. Why? How did you know? Because Arabs came here 1400 years ago, which is completely false, or at least for the most part. So the substantial east to west decline of Near Eastern ancestry, as we can see here, the decline from east to west ancestry, could represent a defined migration associated with Arab conquest 1400 years ago, or merely gene flow occurring gradually among neighboring populations along North African / Arabian Peninsula transects. So first we're going to define where is this transect. This transect would be the Sinai Peninsula here, or could be this entire red coastline, because people would sail from here to here. And gradually, the gene flow coming from these populations interacting and mingling would make its way into Africa. So that is way different than colonization, which is the narrative that a lot of people believe. A lot of people believe that a colonization occurred and Arabs actually, the further back you go, time-wise, the more Arab genetic components you're going to find, which is, again, completely false. And I'm presenting, of course, the evidence for that. So, merely gene flow occurring gradually among neighboring populations along a North African / Arabian Peninsula transect. So, That's the end argument for the Eastern component. So the narrative of having a, a recent Arab ancestor dating to the 7th century is completely false. So it's in reality just some gene flow transported by merchants or by just like very minimal groups of people interacting, and that's basically it. 100% there is no gradual colonization occurring in Morocco, nor in Algeria, nor in any parts of the Maghreb. Now, moving on to another data. We're going to talk about the West African components. So the West African components, as you can see here, we have chosen as reference some tribes like Igbo of Nigeria, some tribes of the Maasai in um, the Horn of Africa, East Africa, and West Africa. So this component here is largely found in Egypt, and these components here are largely found in Northwest Africans. And so, which is completely logical when you just see it with your naked eye. And as we can see here, the autosomal markers, we can see some, where is the Yoruba? As you can see, Sahrawi, Yoruba here, due to the genetic approximation. And again, Southern Moroccan, as you can see here, Algerian, but North, as you can find like just like a speck of in North Moroccans due to the Atlantic slave trade. A lot of the West African genome was introduced in the region, so that's why we can find these markers here. Now, when we go to the European ancestry, so as this study concluded, additional migrations coming from Europe might be plausible through the origin, though the origin and the period where it took place cannot be determined with the present data. So this here is a big problem, specifically heavily present in the Northwestern African gene pool. It's not really heavily studied, like the Irish or the American or like the Russian gene pool. It's really poorly studied, and so we need more studies, more data to really determine the specifics of things. For example, in this case, European ancestry, the origin and the period where it took place. But we have some kind of really logical, realistic, and also real studies that other studies that uh, gives us some of the origin and the period where it took place. And so the less than 25% European ancestry in populations like Algerians and Northern Moroccans could trace back to maritime migrations throughout the Mediterranean. An example of these migrations is, for example, the Phoenician period, was characterized by a lot of Roman colonies throughout Iberia, and Carthage also had colonies like Nova Carthago, and the Greeks had colonies in Libya like Cyrenaica or something. I think Cyrenaica or Cyrenia. Um, and stuff like that. Specifically, the Roman period have introduced a lot of genes flowing into North Africa. That's why a lot of Moroccans, Algerians, Northwest Africans in general, they stumble upon some Italian or Greek ancestry in their DNA tests. So, and another main event that happened that is the last major event, modern event that really introduced a lot of European gene flow into Africa, and specifically Morocco. In the highest concentrations in Morocco is the Reconquista, which is in 1492. That introduced a lot of Morisco Spanish Muslim refugees that were kicked out because of their religious status uh, to Morocco. And so these individuals or these groups settled in, for example, the cities of Fez, Meknès, the capital of Rabat, Tangiers, the Rif region, and they introduced their Spanish genome. And still to this day, there's a lot of Andalusian Morisco families still to this day preserving and marrying between each other and preserving that lineage, although that is starting a little bit to uh, kind of fade away. And instead, there is a more healthier practice, of course, of different Andalusian families marrying into each other rather than the same family marrying into, you know, inbreeding kind of. So now to conclude this study here. So we can conclude that the gene flow that North Africa is composed of is from the three sources. So the three sources are Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa and the Near East. So there is another model in this same study that used three ancestral sources for the method to work, because the method requires, of course, predefined ancestral groups. So we assume southern Moroccans have ancestry from three primary sources: Maghrebi ancestry, aka Berber or Amazigh, Eastern Bantu speakers, and European. And realistically speaking, pardon, this is the most accurate / realistic ancestral composition. Berber ancestry, West African / East African ancestry, and European, aka Southern European ancestry, which is Spanish, Italian / Greek. So these three ancestries are heavily proved or heavily recorded, heavily scientifically proved with the historical context of the period. The Near Eastern component is also present, but in very minimal amounts. If we can see, like for example, we have the Luhya. So the Luhya are basically the East Africans here. So when we go to Morocco, we can see also not only West African, but also in fact, more East African components. So, in the beginning of the video, I said, logically speaking, you would say that these guys went here and these guys went here. So, although we can find a lot of East African ancestry here and also some degree of West African in Egypt, in Morocco, we also see a lot of East African here, way more than the Eastern components. That is due again to the slave trade and also due to uh, basically the main thing is the slave trade. And also that may come due to basically the uh, migrational routes of humans before they went outside of Africa. That means they originated in Africa, went up north, some of them went here, so they stayed here, they diverged, they kind of remained, preserved some traces of their ancestors, and at the same time developed their own allele frequency. And then, of course, another group went here, settled, and of course these guys are the same as these guys, but just they went different routes. And then these guys went to Ireland and went to other places. So it's just these markers here are mainly part of the migrational routes. And that brings us also to the same point of the Eastern markers. These green markers here, they form or they show or they signify the migrational routes that uh, the humans, our ancestors, human ancestors, have made before spreading throughout the planet. So it doesn't mean we're Middle Easterns just because we have this marker here. To know if we're Middle Eastern, we should have either a direct ancestor, right? And or have a DNA test that tells you you're like 40 to 30% or like 50% Arabian, which is the problem with modern DNA tests, because when they tell you you're North African, they merge Western Asian with North African, which is highly offensive in my opinion and highly disastrous in the field of genetics, because you cannot call Norwegians uh, Spanish, you know, although they're on the same continents, right? But that's even worse for us because we're on a whole different continent. And so you can find also the same goes for Ireland and Spain. You can find Iberian blood in the Irish, which makes it a more plausible case here. There is more credibility into calling someone who's from Ireland a like Iberian, because in Iberia we have a lot of Celts here that went to here, then went to Wales, and then went to Ireland. It's more of a plausible, of more of a logical case than calling someone who's from Morocco, calling him Arabian. That's just fucking ridiculous. And so, yeah, that's basically it for the first part. So, the second part is really interesting and it really shows the reason why people currently in the North African countries such as Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, Libya have this narrative of being Arab. And it shows where is the source of this narrative on and who puts this narrative and the purpose of this narrative. So to answer all of these questions, I'm gonna talk about the Marinids, and I found a very interesting paper provided by the University of Granada by this interesting uh, Barbara Gallardo. Excuse my pronunciation. And so gonna put the paper now. So the female name day of the Marinid dynasty of Fez, 13th, 15th century. Identification and study. Feminine onomastic traditions of the Marinid dynasty. That means the traditions of the names of the females, and also they covered some of the males and stuff like that, but mostly the females. Of Fez, 13th and 15th century identification and study, University of Granada. So before jumping into the study, I just want to point out something that I noticed. A lot of studies that I find or I try to dig out to study uh, the past like 1400 years, 1500 years, or less, is mostly covered by Iberians, and that really shows the Northwestern African history is not really appreciated in our native land the same way it is appreciated in Iberia, for example. Of course, you would expect them to be interested also because we have a common point in history, but you get my point too. The Marinid dynasty is purely a uh, African dynasty, a Berber Amazigh African dynasty. And despite this, we see a lot of Iberian historians getting really interested in the case and really producing just amazing works of science and works of history. And so, with that being said, let's start by stating the sources. So, the first source of this dynasty is basically the historiography of the Marinids. So, these guys, fortunately, uh, they have a lot of written productions uh, stating and recording their onomastic traditions and their social and cultural identities that have helped us know more of their history. And so, to really know what we are talking about, is we need to go first to why they did this. So, to know that specifically, so the study of the onomastics carried by the women of the Marinid family of Fez, or the Marinid dynasty, an aspect that to date has not been addressed in a deep and total way, as I said. Very underrated. We need more studies on our history. Um, Despite the great utility that onomastics they can have to reveal various features of the idiosyncrasy of this lineage, and we're gonna get into detail of the latter about the latter. Among them are the political religious legitimizations or legitimization strategies that are developed, as we will explain shortly. And so, uh, let's start by introducing the Marinids. So, the Marinids, as I explained earlier, are the Berber dynasty that ruled the Maghreb between the 12th, 13th, and uh, 15th century. So, they were already in the scene in terms of military involvements with the Almohads and the and stuff like that. So the name Marinids comes from the high quality wool merino that was produced by the Marinids, as they were originally nomadic shepherds and sheep breeders. And some of their accomplishments, they conquered cities like Meknes, Fes, and Marrakesh, Jilmassa, and stuff like that. So, with that being said, we go into why they did this. Now, we have some examples of Arab names introduced by the Marinids to kind of uh, in, impose their their kind of their claim, right? So we have a Al-Zahra, which bore the daughter of Abu Hassan Ali as a possibly shortened version of Fatima Zahra, which is an Islamic name. So Fatima, again, as proven by this study and the historiography of the Marinids, was apparently quite present in the Fezi society. Then we have Ruqayya, which is a shortened version of Raqiyya, of a long version of Raqiyya. And so we can see that the Berbers really took some Islamic names and altered them while preserving the Berber roots. So, as we can see, the name of the daughters that we can see in the Marinid dynasty are a combination of Berber names and Arab names, altered, and in some cases just slightly altered to kind of maybe as a weakness of consistency. They could not be consistent with their attempts to falsify their Arabic origin, maybe. But anyway, now one of the daughters of the Prophet Muhammad is Ruqayya. So Muhammad is the Prophet. So now they named, they took the name from the daughter of Muhammad. Then they named it. They took the name and they introduced it to dynasty, and they introduced also. Where's the Amina again? And Amina was actually the mother of the Prophet Muhammad, and then they took the name Maymuna here to Maymuna bint al-Harith, which is one of the wives of the Prophet, convert to Islam. So this was granted to two women of the Marinid lineage, one on one of the daughters and the other one to the wives of his successor, the successor of Sayyid Uthman II. And so um, again, we have another name of one of the Muhammad's wives, Hafsa. So the daughter of Muhammad's wife, which is Hafsa here, was given, or rather imposed, on one of the daughters of the Marinid Sultan, and then Safiya, another name uh, that the Marinid leader called one of his daughters, which was the name of the Jewish wife of Muhammad, of who converted to Islam. And so again, we have Sukaina, which is the great granddaughter of Muhammad, This was chosen for another daughter of Abu Faris. And then we have another name here, which is Mary the Virgin. So Mary the Virgin, as you can see, was also used as a name. It has two references, by the way, references to Mary the Virgin and another reference to one of the wives of the prophets, Mary Daruz, who is a Coptic Christian from Egypt. So he took a wife, the Marinid Sultan, who also was named Maryam. So as you can see, a lot of attempts to really introduce a lot of biblical Quranic names into dynasty to kind of falsifyly claim the Arabic origin. And we're gonna get into that soon enough. So, despite the fact that they altered some of the names, for example, to avoid getting associated with the Jews or the Hispano-Roman population, the Marinid family tree, we find the already identified Miriam, whom the Arab sources illustrate as a noble woman, deeply Islamized, being a freed slave who professed great affection for her and respect went to the pilgrimage of Mecca. So another name here. So again, we have Sittul Arab, which is a fucking Egyptian Mamluk name. And we can see the fucking obvious appearance of these names here in, you know, again. So somewhat more frequent in the lands of Mamluk Egypt. And so, with that being said, we have concluded, you know. So now we're going to talk about the failure of hiding their real Berber identity. So, despite their claims of ethnic Arabization, the Mariners failed to completely hide their Berber nature, something that is quite evident in the onomastic Amazigh of some women of this family. So, as we will see, at least 13 women amongst the mothers, wives, and daughters whom I previously mentioned carried proper names of this language, pardon me, thereby showing off their ethnic origin, Amazigh. Despite this, the interesting sociocultural features that it reveals, the analysis of this name list is the most difficult to unravel for all different reasons. Again, the culture of today of Islamization, of Arabization, has completely wiped out 90% of the Amazigh culture. The Amazigh culture today is only a shadow of what it was before Islam. As you can see, Berber dialect sometimes makes it difficult to identify some female names. And in our study, the base of some Berber names transcribed in Arabic, which makes them difficult to identify. The lack of knowledge of the Berber language. Yeah, unfortunately. Now, we're going to get into the political religious legitimization strategies of why all these females that I just said showed were named, named Arab and Islamic names and just stuff like that. So we're gonna start by why the Marinids did this. So the names of these women transcend the purely social plane to enter the political one, sometimes offering clear indications of both the orientations or the intentions of the Marinids of naming these women Islamic names to kind of really highlight and send the message of hello there, we are Arabs. And so Ideological characteristics of the Maronid lineage, as well as the resources on which he cemented his political religious legitimacy. It's been reflected on this matter. We're considering certain problems related to the legitimacy of power. The problems related to the legitimacy of power could be traced from the onomastics of a dynasty, or if the onomastics contradicts the criteria of the legitimacy of this dynasty, then we're going to find a lot of rebellions, dynasties being overthrown, and stuff like that. With taken into context the previous dynasties promising to really apply the true Orthodox Islam, and then later on they were overthrown due to the annihilation or the collapse of the promise. If you established yourself as a direct relative of the same people who introduced the religion, then you completely transcend yourself into a divine power, divine ruling power that prevents all the intellectual elite in society, scholars. Let me remind you that those same scholars and intellectual elite were more appreciated back then because of the scarcity of knowledge, scarcity of people who can read, people who can write, and stuff like that. So those same people have or had a big power to affect the popular sentiment and also to uh, think themselves. So they know they know that what's going on. So although a good part of the feminine denominations of the Maronids were the Berber tradition, their affiliation to this ethnic group forced them, on the other hand, to make a profound effort to prove a remote Arab and Islamic religious ethnic origin. Considering the close identifications of both elements, the Banu Marin, who are the Maronids, had to design their own link with them to establish their legitimacy, them being Arab, the Arabs. The Banu Marin had to design their own link with the Arabs to establish their legitimacy, sometimes becoming the name day, in this case feminine, an expressive vehicle of the same. This intention led the Maronids to also adopt, together with denominations in Tamazigh, Arabic and Islamic, sometimes even reaching a dual name expressed in both languages. The problem of legitimacy. The Maronid dynasty, as I said just earlier, lacked a recognized past, just like other nomadic corporations like the Almoravids, like the Almohads, etc. An origin with deep historical roots that would allow carry out its work of conquest and expansion in the Maghreb without running into, with theoretical approaches that were opposed by the intellectual elite of society, or with a insistently adverse popular sentiment. The position of someone who's related to someone who's like 6,000 kilometers or more than 6,000 kilometers away, ruling over your head is a powerful message. Is a powerful message. A powerful bloodline dynasty that came far away from the land of the biblical and the Quranic legendary inscriptions has a bigger impact back then, had a bigger impact back then due to the scarcity of the information, scarcity of knowledge, not like today. Unfortunately, we have we still have people who believe, just like the people in the 14th century currently in 2023, who still believe this act of um, trying to proclaim themselves Arabs. They think that is actually true and legit. That's how stupid people are, or at least how stupid people are in Africa, at least. or Africa specifically. So the Marinids had not risen to power in the Maghreb on the basis of revitalizing the religious ideology of Islam, nor could they. Like the latter, like the Almoravids or the Almohads, proclaim themselves caliphs or descendants of sharifs, for which they channeled their legitimization through the adoption of a supposed Arab origin. So they did not really tell you that we are the descendants of the prophets, but they tell you that we are Arab, and a staunch defense of Orthodox Islam. The intense process of Islamization that the Marinids undertook between the end of the 12th century and early 13th century entailed a series of substantial identity changes that fundamentally affected the rethinking of their genealogy, and you should add here affected the rethinking of current Moroccan populations in order to capture in it the double transition process experienced by this group from their own Jahiliyyah to Islamization on the one hand, and from his Berber ethnicity to an identification with a supposed ancestral Arab origin. On the other hand, to achieve the Arabization of the lineage, the Banu Marine traced a new genealogical chain, or nasab in Arabic, which they included prestigious male ancestors with Arabic names. However, the veracity of said genealogical affiliation was cemented, on the other hand, on the construction of a series of legendary stories with which their chronicles try to justify these supposed origins, with the Arabic language playing an essential role in this strategy. As these anecdotes reflect, certain women played an essential role in the accreditation of Arabism of this dynasty from their own names. So we see a lot of the family roots, for example, in Rawd al-Qirtas, Ibn Abi Zar traces the family roots of the Minarets to Mu'tar ibn Nizar, figure originating from one of the two most important Arab tribes in the north of the Arabian Peninsula. The author himself already refers to the Arab parent origin of the Marinid family, as he reveals that this Mu'tar has two sons, Ilyas and Ailan, with a woman named precisely Al-Rabab bint, I don't want to pronounce that. So um, both its genealogical chain and the name itself already reflects an explicit intention to assign a maternal Arab origin to this undoubtedly Berber lineage. The next woman we hear from is Muzna bin Sa'd. So this woman here, as you can see here, despite all of the claims, all the latter, they completely failed. Which is quite because it's quite evident in the names like Raqiya, like for example Maymuna, Amina, and stuff like that. So we can see definitely the attempts of these guys to really Arabize and impose these things here. And so um, now we go to conclusions to conclude this video. So throughout the latter, it has been possible to verify how the philological and sociocultural analysis of the onomastics of the women of the Marinid dynasty constitutes a very useful element to deepen the study of different facets of this lineage. On one hand, to reconstruct the various identity traits, ethnical, cultural, geographical, religious, etc., both of those and of the sovereigns with whom they were related in different family capacities, mothers, sisters, wives, concubines, daughters. The Marinids developed a political religious legitimization on two main pillars: some supposed Arab roots, Berberites through a legendary ancestral familiarity with the Berber culture, and deep Islamization, as has been tried to be demonstrated from these guys. Uh, these feminine names constituted an exponential indication of both phenomenon and was expressed in both languages, Arabic and Berber. Sometimes Berber names written in the Arabic script and vice versa. Sometimes Berber names altered and the Berber roots preserved. And so, according to this study, since the 19th century, Maronid women received both Berber and Arabic names, although in different proportions. The former, although much rarer than the latter, which reveals the weight of ethnicity and culture that Amazigh culture had uh, carried by the Maronids, despite their reluctance to express it and to, in fact, erase it. These Berber nomenclatures were carried by 3 legitimate wives of some emirs, but above all by a total of 10 daughters. So 10 daughters carried these Berber nomenclatures, and thus, shows the kind of a welcome towards the transmission of from generation to generation of the Berber culture within the family. However, it is indeed difficult to speak of the onomastic traditions. Um, because due to the fact that, for example, in the case, except the case of Tazunt or Suna, for example, we have no repetitions of other feminine denominations in Tamazight documented in this family. As for the Arabic names, these compensated for the presence of the previous ones in the Banu Badin family tree, so their frequent adoption being especially necessary to consolidate the supposed Arabism of their cultural identity. Among the most important are the Islamic names corresponding, as has already been stated, to the Muslim mothers of the believers, following in this the same behavior as many other dynasties. So again, it's not really unique to the Maronids. So the Maronids, this is what's interesting. The Maronids imposed them with great assiduity, being carried by 3 legitimate wives, both of Arab and ethnicity. Muwalladats are basically the concubines in Arabic, and above all by 13 daughters of different emirs. So, as you can see, the names in Berber carried by the Berber nomenclatures, even if they were, they were even they were written in Arabic script, were carried by 3 legitimate wives and total of 10 daughters. The Arabic names, they were carried by 13 daughters and women, also concubines, who were destined to become the models of virtue, represented by those emblematic figures in the history of Islam, like Maryam the Virgin, like the great granddaughter of the Prophet, like a lot of the names of his wives, his daughters, and stuff like that. Emblematic figures. These are emblematic figures in the history of Islam, divine figures, sacred figures, which they would later pass on to their children. The use on a single occasion of a name from the biblical tradition, such as that which is the name of Miriam. Mary the Virgin, such as that of Miriam, perhaps denotes, on the contrary, a conscious intention to avoid identifying this Berber family, both, you know, with, for example, like something which is Jewish or Christian. So the fact that the name Mary was not really repeated, was never repeated. The use of the name Mary was only mentioned on one occasion in the Maronid family tree. Clearly shows a clear intention. They knew what they were doing. A clear intention of really Arabizing the shit out of this and purely associating themselves with Islam and really trying to remove everything, which is trying their best. They tried their best to kind of, they were, as you know, they were showed a clear reluctance to express their Amazigh culture, and instead they were really fully embracing the Berber, the Arab Arab and Islamic names, and also they completely avoided using the name Mary again. So, and by that being said, by saying that, we would have finished the entire video, and I hope I made it clear in the two parts, that is the genetic part and then the cultural part, that we as Berbers, we have been victims of brainwashing by the ruling dynasties who try to impose a Arab origin on themselves, and then the populace really just going along and tagging along for the ride, and then them spread to the local populace, and then really it nested in our brains and nested, and it was passed on from generation to generation, because the nature of Moroccan society is really traditional in terms of onomastics and religion and families and history and whatnot. It's really purely traditional. And so, even proving it even further with genetic studies and genome sequencing. So I hope I just laid a layout, or how they say it, I present my case, or lay out my case, lay down my case in this video, and thank you for watching.